Disclaimer and warning statement. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Exposing Deathcare podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the host or the podcast. Content warning. This podcast contains discussions of sensitive topics related to the funeral industry, including unethical practices, trauma, and misconduct. Listener discretion is advised. The stories shared in this podcast are presented anonymously to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. Thank you for listening, and we hope that by sharing these stories, we can work together to improve the funeral industry for everyone involved. Welcome to Exposing Deathcare, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on the funeral industry, revealing the truth behind its darkest practices. I'm your host, Em, and each episode we bring you real stories from funeral directors and death care workers who have experienced the best and worst of this hidden world. Once again, before we dive in, a quick disclaimer. The stories shared on this podcast are anonymous and may contain sensitive content. Listener discretion advised.
Welcome to the Exposing Deathcare podcast. We have two guests on today's show, X and Y. X and Y, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So both of you, one at a time, how did you get into death care?
I was very young. I was at a very young age. My neighbor was a funeral director and he owned a funeral home. And I always wondered what it was like. So I finally went to my first funeral as a young child. And I knew at that moment that this is something that I needed to pursue. But of course, I didn't pursue it till later in life.
I initially started out in a different profession. I wanted to initially get into forensics. I've always had a great passion for working with people. I also enjoyed anatomy as well, so bringing the two together with funeral directing and then the part of embalming was really how I wanted to get into things. I had a couple family funerals that I just wanted to know what was going on behind the scenes because I was always curious about that stuff. That's how I really got into things within the funeral industry.
How long have the two of you been working in this industry, if you want to give it years or months?
It'd be 10 years for both of us.
Do y'all work together, or did you work together?
We actually went to school together.
Let's talk about pay. What are your opinions on the pay in this industry for and then the job titles that you had at the time?
I started out as a student right out of school. I had a job while I was going to school. And for students, the pay is not that great. I was receiving a low amount of money for a lot of work that I did, and that unfortunately continued into my
How much?
internship as well.
You got to tell us how much.
It was $10 an hour, and
All
that
right.
continued into my internship as well.
Can you tell us what year this was?
Ooh, about 5 years ago.
Okay, so 2019, right before the COVID happened.
Yes.
All right, y'all go on.
When I started, I actually made the most as an intern at this facility. I started out around $34,000 a year, but I was working 70 hours a week with no overtime. And it was very, very difficult on me. It was difficult on my body. It was difficult just mentally. Then they had me doing removals through the night for free. So I was not paid for any of that.
They considered you salary?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was not paid for any of it. I was not paid to come in on my days off. I was not paid for any of that. And that was really hard on me.
Did you work for family-owned or corporate?
It was a family-owned funeral home.
My story is relatively the same. I started off at $10 and then it continued $10 all throughout my internship. I got paid a little bit more when I first became a licensed funeral director. I was working 70, 80 hours a week for no extra incentives, no pay. I would say the only good thing about where I was working at the time was they did offer benefits, and I know that's not what a lot of funeral homes can afford. I was very thankful for that.
What were those benefits?
Medical, and it was medical, dental, and some eye coverage.
Did they pay that for you, or you had like a monthly that you had to contribute to it?
So the good thing is it was fully paid.
Excellent. That is a good thing to hear because not a lot of employers offer that. So, any
Right.
employers that may be listening to this, take note.
Yes, for sure.
Well, what about you, X? Did you have any benefits?
They told me they wouldn't even look at me for benefits unless I was hired as a full-time employee. They sort of told me I was a contracted employee as an intern. It was really odd.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they made up their own rules. I don't know, but
Oh, yeah.
they had no incentives for me at all. None. No bonuses, no money for removal, no after hours,
No
no
overtime.
overtime, holidays. I had to work every holiday. It was very rough. And I'll be honest, I was older and it was very difficult for me because a lot of these other funeral homes only wanted to hire the youth.
Mm-hmm.
And really didn't have a choice. I just had to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the tough part for me.
Why were you at a corporate funeral home or family owned?
I was at a family owned firm.
Moving forward, how did y'all feel the training was?
For me, the training was baptism by fire. That is the only way that I could honestly put it. I had no option of saying no or I didn't feel comfortable doing things. I had to do it or I knew I was getting in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
There was rarely any training.
Oh, I can answer that. Let me answer this one. So here's what I'm seeing right now. This is the trend I'm seeing with these kids coming out of school. They are being used, abused. They are cheap labor. They
Mm-hmm.
are not being taught. It breaks my heart. They're used for cheap removal. They're being injured. They're being used for grass cutting, hedge clipping, and car washing.
Answering
They have
telephones.
answering telephones.
Yeah, or how to interact with the families when you've got your, protege out there. I understand that yard work
Right.
and maintenance and all of that is a part of the funeral industry, but
I
I know
get
what
it.
you're talking about, and I have seen it time and time again. And I also have people reaching out to me, or they're talking about it in these online forums, that they are absolutely just being dragged down by the menial work that they're getting stuck
Here's
with because they aren't being invited into these arrangements.
here's what happened to me. I was promised I was doing my internship and the owner said to me, "We will hire you after your internship." My enthusiasm turned my coworker who was around my age into like she did not like me. She thought I was stepping on her toes, and I wasn't. I was just so enthusiastic about the job that her being there for 20 years showed that she wasn't enthusiastic anymore.
Hmm.
So that that didn't look good for either of us.
You were a
So
threat.
correct. So now at the end of my internship, they didn't want to hire me. I had to look elsewhere. And that was in the middle of COVID. And
Mm.
then I got slammed with COVID. My enthusiasm really wasn't good for a lot of
I,
people. There's a lot of people that really think you're stepping on their toes, and you're really not.
Most of the people I know that have come into this business for the right reasons are genuinely eager to learn,
Right,
help, soothe,
right.
and they're getting run over.
They are, and here's the thing. Maybe it's all stemming from mortuary school. You know,
Hmm.
it's it all starts there. You
What
know.
could they do different? What could they do better?
Well, first off, professionalism is not being taught.
Hmm.
So the kids wear yoga pants to school instead of being dressed appropriately, or they're
L-
wearing shorts and tank tops, you know.
Let me assure you, there are schools out there that actually have dress codes. The schools that I went to required us to dress as if we were going to work in the funeral home. And
The
to my knowledge, they still require that. So it is disheartening to hear that there are other schools that aren't preparing the students for this.
And I think that's wonderful that there are schools out there.
I'm going to interject real quick and say maybe that's the area you guys live in. I've been really impressed with what I've seen with, let's say, progressive mortuary schools. I'm going to guess that y'all's is not progressive, but more progressive ones are showing the process of dressing each other, casketing each other. And it just thrills me to see that because, like I've said with other guests that I've had on the show, how many of us have dropped a body? It would have been great to have training with the different kind of cots before you just thrown out to the wolves.
Right. Absolutely.
Why? What are your thoughts? Why? What could the schools do to be better?
I think it's a great thing that there's a lot of schools that are progressive in doing and having a dress code. I don't know if it's just because it's like the area that we live in, like you mentioned. I think maybe this is definitely a tough question. I'm actually gonna have to think about this.
That's fine. Do you feel like I guess, how long ago were you in mortuary school?
7 years or so.
Y'all have some stories to share, some things that you've experienced. Take it away.
During my internship, there was a lot of abuse. There was mental abuse. Then there was sexual abuse. My ass was grabbed several times. I was pushed up against the wall. A person that was there for close to 30 years. And this person had some problems with other women in the past. And I got out of there. And I sent a letter, and a couple weeks later, received a letter from a funeral home saying if I said one more thing about this person, they would send an attorney to me and sue me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have the money to fight that,
Mm-hmm.
So I just let it go. I will tell you this. I've seen a lot of things. I've heard a lot of things. And I'm afraid for some of the younger girls, the mental health issues in the industry. I don't know if it's the alcohol abuse. I don't know if it's the drug abuse. I know funeral directors that have both of those problems. I know of funeral directors that are sexual predators and they got away with it. It almost destroyed me. Literally almost destroyed me.
I'm really sorry that you went through that. I want you to know a lot of other people have had this experience, and you're very brave to share this with us.
It almost killed me, and almost killed my family. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult for me to talk about right now.
Yeah, I can understand.
The only person it knows is the person that's with me right now.
Yeah.
And that's it. Even my own family doesn't know about it.
There aren't enough resources out there for those of us that have experienced this on the job. And the funeral industry is incredibly cliquey. I had earlier incidents of sexual harassment in my career. I have a friend that reached out on social media to me that was experiencing something like that at the family-owned funeral home that she worked at. And I told her, if you don't stand up for yourself, if you and your coworkers don't stand up for yourself, this will continue to happen to other people. And they stood up for themselves. It took a whole lot. It took a bunch of them together to do it. Know that it took mountains to make a difference there. And it did make a difference. He had to pass the legacy on to somebody else and get his butt out of the funeral home.
And that's probably why my days are going to be over soon because I'm getting much older. So I look at these young ladies and it breaks my heart because you got these older funeral directors, these men who aren't going anywhere, who have used these women up. And it's more women than anything to see them abused mentally, physically, sexually. And there's not a whole lot we can do. These funeral directors, these owners, they got a lot of money. We don't have a lot of money. We don't make a lot of money.
And I think that's where the organizations in the funeral industry, and I'm going to throw names out there, the National Funeral Directors Association, CANA, ICCFA, I don't think they realize what is really going on in some of these funeral homes, because they have the men with the deep pockets or the women with the deep pockets or
Right.
whoever with the deep pockets going to these
Right.
conventions and hobnobbing and making their opinion known, but nobody is going to the funeral home and actually discussing with the people that are working there and experiencing these things. I know one of them at NFDA is following this uh, podcast, and I want to say to that individual, please do more. Please, there are people out there that are struggling and suffering in this industry that really wanted to make a difference, and there's not enough mentorship or support for them.
There really isn't. And I seriously thank you so much because, you know, it's just been a struggle for a long time. And it's just, I'm just so shot down from it. And, it literally almost ruined me. I know you have had problems too.
This one's a little tough as well for me, just because this whole situation that I'm going to talk about, it's mainly about manipulation and threats. I am a mentally, physically, and emotionally abused funeral director who was underpaid. During the time at the firm that I was at, I felt like nothing I did was ever right. I was consistently belittled, blamed, and questioned for anything that I did by my former employer. It seemed as if there always had to be an explanation for something, no matter if what you did was good or bad. There was also no staff support, and I felt like we were constantly looked down upon. We were also consistently threatened with reprimandations into things, which is a major tactic of manipulation. I worked 70 plus hours a week with no extra incentives or proper pay. Another issue is I constantly had to worry about losing my days off. I get there are days where you may need to spend extra time at the funeral home or come in and help on your days off. But when it became such a routine occurrence, I was starting to become burnt out. I was going above and beyond for a place that was not doing the same for me. There would be times where I would have a medical appointment where something would be wrong. I would kindly explain that I needed to go for such reasons, and to preface, I wasn't on call or for any of those nights, but I was constantly told that I needed to be at the firm's beckoning call. My former employer at the time would tell me that there are many appointments that I've missed over the years, so you do too. I was manipulated into thinking that my health wasn't important and that I truly needed to be there. I know that there's moments as a funeral director that you'll be there longer hours, and everything like that. But I was expected to eat, breathe, and sleep for a place that was not doing the same for me, and I was putting my own health at risk. The mental abuse and manipulation caused my light to become dim. The abuse and threats caused me to lose my confidence in my ability. I felt like I had no confidence while being belittled. However, my shine will always be present because this is my calling and I'm not a quitter. Overall, I truly believe, back to the enthusiasm that we were talking about earlier on in the episode, that serving others and community involvement caused people to become threatened and jealous. It's sad it had to be that way because we are all here for the same purpose, which is to help for others. For years, I just brushed these actions and tactics of manipulation off my shoulder because I thought things were going to get better, as there was many promising times. Many. However, only things got worse and were definitely not going to get any better. I felt being complacent and putting up with was just the way to avoid any issues over the years. Being complacent is not the way to go because it just gets you stepped on. I knew I deserved a lot better along the way in my mind, but I was in fear of not being able to find a job. I was manipulated and constantly threatened by my former employer. I was belittled where everything was questioned. And after a while, you just get so beat down to the point where you just can't really function as a person.
I understand that one.
And it caused so many health issues that I now unfortunately have to get addressed because of not being able to take priority of my own health and putting my work above me.
It just illustrates how common this unfortunately is in the industry.
I just don't know what we can do to help others.
Talking about it is going to be a big step, I think. Sharing about it I don't think there are some funeral forums online that they are discussing some of it, but there are still not enough resources. And again, it goes back to these bigger organizations that are supposed to be there for everyone. I assumed they were there for everybody. That's what I'm talking about. I think these big organizations need to look more into what the complaints are and how to help them. And if it means continuing education for these old boomers that don't know how to treat their employees, then give them more of that. But
I don't know. They seem to have gotten away with it for so many years. They just put a Band-Aid on it and they just move on. The person that assaulted me is still there. And it's just sad. And I wasn't the only victim. There's been victims in the past. I do know
mhm.
that. And there's just cover-ups and cover-ups. It's
my
very sad.
advice my advice in the past would be to band together and bring suit against this individual. I can't give people that advice anymore, knowing the legal abuse capabilities that go with people that have influence in the community.
You're right. Everybody knows everybody in this business.
Hmm.
It's a very tough business, especially for women.
What else would y'all like to share with me today?
I guess that's probably what we really needed to get out there. If it's happening to somebody else, you're not alone. We get it.
I would say don't give up.
Okay.
I recently got a job at a top-notch funeral home where I'm no longer manipulated. My opinion matters. My current employer is always asking me, what can we do to make the business better? And I'm valued. So I tell people don't give up because it does get better. You will find that employer who will respect you for you. It might take a few bad employers to get to the right one, but it shouldn't be that way. It might take a few bad employers to get to the right one, but you'll eventually get there and you'll make it.
I want to get there. I want to make it eventually. I've had some really bad employers, but
Oh.
that's what you get for being a mouthpiece and having nobody to govern what you're putting online. I didn't have a PR team, I was just me, myself, and I. So
But
yeah,
I
I hope someday somebody appreciates me.
they definitely will for sure. I do recommend for the newer funeral directors or the people who are coming out of mortuary school, when your employer says they are going to search your social media, they don't think
Mhm.
they don't think that's going to happen, but it really does. Really
Mhm.
does. So I always tell newer students, always watch what you put on the internet because you never
Mhm.
know. You
That's
never
Keep
know when
that
it's going to come back. Like,
man, the new ones that are getting on there, like I'm gonna throw one under the bus. Mortician Camp. Her content is great, but I
mhm,
fear for her. And just like there was another one in Florida, a young lady that's got 2 licenses, and I'm
mhm,
gonna kick myself for not remembering her name. I fear for them putting this content online, even if it is very classy, very well done, because I've been the brunt of retaliation and hate, and I don't
Yep.
want anybody to have to go through what I've been through.
I will say this. I had a Facebook at one time, and I wrote on a page. It was about tombstones, and I wrote something like it was two stillborns. They put a picture of stillborns on a tombstone, and I wrote on there on social media. Oh, wouldn't it have been nice if they put two angels? Well, the person that I worked with called my boss, and I got fired for that. It was on a Facebook page on tombstones. I wrote, wouldn't it have been nice to
Oh,
put two angels on the tombstone? Well, that person called
yeah.
my boss up, and my boss fired me
Oh my
because I wrote
gosh.
that.
Yeah. They are very sensitive about what's posted online.
Social media could be pretty bad.
What's your advice for others?
It's a shame that a lot of people can't form their opinions. I would stay off social media, stay out of politics, lay low.
Disheartening.
It really is. It's very sad.
Those of us that are creative and want to put our art and our experience out there for others to learn from. Kudos to those that continue to do it despite
Yeah,
the adversity.
I
It's
know.
hard.
It
It's hard
really
to put
is.
yourself out there and get run over and run over. I want to thank you both for being on the show.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to an episode of Exposing Deathcare, the podcast. I truly appreciate your support and the courage of those who have shared their stories with us. If you or someone you know has a story to share, we encourage you to reach out. Your anonymousness will be protected, and your story could help prevent further harm. You can leave comments, ask questions, or provide feedback on our social medias, Exposing Deathcare, or email exposingdeathcare@gmail.com. Podcast music by Enlia.